what was going through the president's mind gets to the very important question that Jenna asked earlier about culpability and what do we believe, and was this just something that dropped into their laps or whatever. We have, in attempting to answer this, we have three different kinds of information. And I'm not going to go into them. You've been exposed to a lot of them tonight and will be to more of them. A lot of these pieces of information taken together prove that the official story, the official conspiracy theory of 9/11 is a bunch of hogwash. It's impossible. But they don't prove what really happened and who was responsible. But there's a second group of facts having to do with the cover-up. And, you know, these are a whole bunch of things like the confiscation of the surveillance tapes of the impact on the Pentagon, the confiscation of the air traffic control voice tapes. It goes on and on and on. Taken together, these things prove that high levels of our government don't want us to know what happened and who is responsible. And then there's a third set of facts that impinges on the president's thinking and all of that. These are the facts of what happened after 9/11, and this is a historical record. For example, Ashcroft and his cronies got their Patriot Act, which takes away our civil liberties and trashes the Bill of Rights. UNICAL got its invasion of Afghanistan and secured a route for oil and gas pipeline for $1 trillion worth of gas from the Caspian Sea to the Indian Ocean. Cheney's Halliburton got no-bid contracts to support the troops in destroying Iraq and other contracts to rebuild it. And more importantly, all those peanut guys, the neocons, got their invasion of Iraq. They got regime change in Iraq. So the questions come, who gained from 9/11? Who covered up crucial information about 9/11? And who put out the patently false stories about 9/11 in the first place? When you take those three things together, I think the case is pretty clear that it's highly placed individuals in the administration with all roads passing through Dick Cheney. I think the very kindest thing that we can say about George W. Bush and all the people in the U.S. government that have been involved in this massive cover-up, the very kindest thing we can say is that they were aware of the impending attacks and let them happen. Now, some people will say that's much too kind. However, even that is high treason and conspiracy to commit murder. When we talk about the rest of this stuff, there's one thing I want us to keep in mind. If enough of the American people are stupid enough and manipulated enough to reelect this gang of thugs, then we, the true American patriots, will have no recourse but to continue pushing for a real investigation, perhaps by the Attorney General of New York City, who knows? an investigation telling the truth and leading to the indictment of these people. Their conviction, their removal from office, and their incarceration for a very long period of time.
We're going to return to our panel to discuss these issues, whether or not 9/11 was unavoidable. Still, we wonder, after such a supported and supposed failure, shouldn't anyone be held accountable? First of all, I want to introduce John Prados. He's a journalist and an author. His work appears regularly in one of the nation's great old journals on military affairs, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. Welcome, John.
Carl Schwartz is a principal in global access and a former high-level consultant to the Republican Party. Arkansas Republicans once asked him to run for governor against Bill Clinton, and more recently, he's been researching the background reasons for the removal of the Taliban. Carl Schwartz.
Welcome, Carl. Mr. Prados, who, if anyone in the government, should be held accountable for 9/11?
Who's to be held accountable? I think it's pretty clear. The President of the United States, George W. Bush, who failed to exert leadership at a key moment in the nation's history. The Vice President of the United States, Richard Cheney, who was in charge of a committee to deal with the terrorism issue and wouldn't meet with it before September 11th happened. Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, who cut money out of the terrorism budget the day before September 11th. The National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and her deputy, Stephen Hadley, who held back the plan to do anything about al-Qaeda for 9 months during the months that something could have been happened. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, which muffed its investigation of what was going on in terrorist circles in the United States. The Central Intelligence Agency, who failed to appreciate everything that was going on, even though George Tenet was running around with his hair on fire. There's a lot more I could talk about, but I think we've got little time here, so I'm going to pass it along.
There's somebody I want to hear from, and thank you, John. That was quite eloquent. You know, not only was the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act signed under President Nixon, but a lot of the recent environmental laws passed we couldn't have done without Sherry Boehlert and John Chafee, now deceased, and Lincoln Chafee, and wonderful Republicans who've stood up in the environment. We have a Republican here tonight who's here to prove this is and should be a nonpartisan issue. I'd like to hear from Carl Schwartz, please. Carl.
Every time I hear the name Ashcroft, I have to remind myself this was a guy that lost an election and a gubernatorial in the Show Me state to a dead guy. And then his next job is to come before every one of us and treat us all as an al-Qaeda suspect. So I am not real proud to call myself a Republican these days. I tell the simple story that I became a Republican in 1980 because of Bill and Hillary Clinton, and I became an independent recently because of George Bush. There have been several things said this evening. These are just factual, correcting things. We talked about this backstage. Because of the media and the timeline and how people put all this together, the doctor brought up Unocal a minute ago. Unocal is actually owned by the Venezuelan government-owned Petroleus. They are not a U.S.-owned company anymore. If you know anything about the pegging of the dollar to oil and the pegging of the dollar to the euro, there's only two companies on the face of this planet that have done that. One is Iraq. You can see what happened to them. And the other one was Venezuela. And you can pretty well come to a conclusion there's been quite a bit of interference in Venezuela as to what to do about their pegging to the dollar. We've tried to stomp Chavez to death politically down there. To address Sibel Evans, that came up in the clip a minute ago, I interviewed Sibel Evans for a book that I wrote, and everybody thinks it's got a cute name to it, and I didn't even name it. It's titled One-Way Ticket to Crawford, Texas. A conservative Republican speaks out. Where my story started in this actually started in 1999. I left Wall Street. I've been in this